Now, as ever, to the front pages. There's lots of stuff, brimming with stories. The front pages are today. Newspapers are today. There's the Sunday Times. The Prime Minister, we're going to ban benefits for EU migrants. We'll be talking about that shortly. In the Sunday Telegraph, the police are stopping. Police stop using us as ambulance drivers. It says 2,000 Britons fighting with terrorists now in Iraq and Syria. We'll talk about that too, I'm sure. The Observer. George Osborne's plan for £7 billion of tax cuts is a total fantasy, warns Vince Cable. Again, we'll talk about that. A disconcerting picture of Nigella Lawson there, all in white on the front of the Mail on Sunday. And Sir Cliff Richard is going to sue the BBC for invasion of privacy. Finally, a very important story, actually, in terms of British politics generally. Scotland is going to get full control of income tax, predicts Scotland on Sunday. And again, we'll be talking about all of that because I have two fantastic political commentators in Margaret Hodge and David Davis. Welcome to you both. David, let's start off with the terror story.
We've been degraded to political commentators now. Anyway, look, you've got the Home Secretary on today, and you've got Bernard Hogan-Howe. So perhaps the first story to start with is this one. It's May in Blitz on terror data. This is an action to make it possible for the agencies and the police to find out who's used a particular ISP. It's a stepping stone back to the old Snoopers Charter, the thing that Parliament roundly threw out about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, because they weren't convinced that this was necessary. Now, this technical change is okay, it's sensible, but the Home Secretary has said, in effect, that she sees it as a route back into the whole Snoopers Charter. And frankly, you know, I think she's going to have real trouble. I mean, there's lots and lots of propaganda out about at the moment about this, but she's going to have real trouble. The simple question to her is, look, do you absolutely trust the people doing this? Always never to make a mistake, never to get it wrong, never to misuse it? If you do, let the judges decide when they can do it, not let them decide themselves. So, big story, I think. It's going to be a big story in the coming week.
Well, Theresa May is all over the papers today, and she's got her Desert Island disc, so there's an eclectic Theresa May today. There's a story in the papers, in the Mirror, that I picked out, which I welcome, which is her proposals to extend the reasons for which people can be prosecuted and convicted for domestic abuse. It's one of the biggest issues in our lives, and she is going to introduce a new emotional and psychological harm test, and that coercive control will be an offence. Now, this is all about psychological domestic abuse. And I know David is a little bit sceptical about this, but I have to say that a lot of the psychological domestic abuse happens in middle-class families. They may not thump each other, but they certainly abuse each other in terrible, terrible ways. And I think if we don't show, as a society, that we really will not tolerate that in the home, we're not going to be the sort of civilised community that we want to be.
I can see the problem, and I agree, it's a serious problem, but provability is going to be a real issue here.
But provability, if I can say so.
The chance for miscarriage of justice is really quite serious.
Provability is always an issue in domestic violence, because even if it's physical domestic violence, it's the two of you in the room, and that's why we've got such an appallingly low conviction rate on domestic violence with physical things.
I'll make an awful prediction, and that is that the rate will go down as a result of this, not up. That's the terrible.
Well, hopefully behaviour will change.
Let's just
We're commentators today, not arguing at all.
Let's just meanwhile move briskly on to the immigration story, the other big story of the day. After, of course, the Rochester.
Well, it's all Rochester, UKIP, and immigration. Every single newspaper's got something on it. And indeed, I'm going to plug my own. I'm in the Mail on Sunday talking about it too.
It's very funny, David, because you're saying we're aloof and so forth, and then you turn the page and there's a Labour MP saying we're aloof as well.
So, yeah, we're having a competition at who's the most aloof. But the hard problem, and immigration is just a symptom of this. I mean, Margaret's actually got more frontline experience of this issue than some of us, but the immigration is just a symptom of a third of the country perhaps viewing the whole political class as just a pair of competing aristocracies, a sort of public service aristocracy and a private service private sector aristocracy. And you know, it's really serious. Of course it's going to make the whole next election unpredictable. It may even make it sort of no outcome. You know, we may have a no overall control government. So it's a serious problem which I don't think any of the political class have found the answer to yet.
Well, I think hopefully we know some ways. I think I completely agree with David that alienation from the political class and the mainstream political classes is huge. And it's not about who we are, it's about what our experience is. So, you know, coming into Parliament without having done anything outside politics is not a good route to connecting with people. And then it's all about how we do our politics. And I think too often we set the political agenda from Westminster, we go down to our constituencies and then pronounce. And what I learnt from my real campaigning against the BNP from 2006 right through to today.
This is embarking.
This is embarking.
Which is kind of lots of white vans, lots of England flags embarking.
Of course. And what the England flags are all about is a number of things. First of all, they are about football. And don't forget that. And the other thing is we've recaptured the England flag. The English flag has an important tradition in the past, but you may have to make it relevant to the present and the future. So if I take an example, St. George's Day celebrations in April, what we now do is we have a lot of street parties, but who's there? It's not just white working class people who are reconnected to me, but it is also people from different colours, different races, different ethnicity, and you can capture that feeling of nationhood.
I hope you remind them that St. George was the Palestinians.
There you are, there you are, there you are.
But there is a real issue, I think there's an issue here as well, which we'll perhaps come to in a second, which is that there is a habit on the part of the Metropolitan League that if somehow a right-wing party lays claim to something, we recoil from it. And that's what's happened with immigration. You know, oh, UKIP are talking about immigration, we mustn't. That's rubbish. They're talking about it because we've let them claim the ground. And the same is true of the flag. The flag is much the same sort of problem.
I mean, I do think on the issue of immigration, and I don't know where you want to go on it, there's a story on the front page of the Sunday Times.
There's going to be a big new announcement by the Prime Minister cutting all in-work benefits for EU migrants. And what I'm interested in is how significant a move would this be?
Well, can I just say that I'm glad we're talking about immigration. We should have started talking about it years ago. And I try to encourage people to do so after 2006 when the BNP got 12 seats on the council in Barking. But what is interesting here is that the government has moved from saying we're going to control all numbers to we're going to have quotas to now we're just going to go on benefits. And there's a lot of dishonesty in the debate around immigration.
I should say, David, I mean, the Conservatives did promise to get overall numbers down to tens of thousands and have broken that promise.
What they should have done before the election is to separate out the net immigration from the gross, because it's impossible to control the overall number. But to come back to this, I mean, this issue of benefits, you see, I mean, it's a worthwhile policy. Let's not get it wrong. It's a worthwhile policy, but the simple truth is that most of the people who come here as immigrants are not coming here for benefits. They're coming here for jobs. And if I were a Romanian whose average wage is 1/8 of the British average wage, I'd be in London too. So what needs to be sorted out is actually the fundamental free movement of peoples in Europe.
Do you think that can be done while we're members of the EU?
Yes, I think John Major. Look, John Major made a speech in Berlin a week or two ago, and he's nobody's sort of anti-European, and he clearly was thinking that they could do something about it. It's legal. All this nonsense about it being illegal is wrong. Transitional arrangements are normal. It's just you've got to design a transitional arrangement properly so you don't end up, as we did, frankly, under Labour, with a massive input.
I do have a different take. Am I allowed to talk about it? I think my take is that the trouble that politicians have got themselves into is that we always promise something around numbers and we always fail. And my whole experience from my own constituency in Barking is that if you want to rebuild trust, you don't promise something you don't deliver. What we can deliver is strong borders. So, for example, the fact that we have failed to get rid of foreign national prisoners, despite Charles Clarke losing his job on that, the fact that we've got 50,000 people who haven't got the permission to stay, who've disappeared, and I think this agenda is okay, that people realise that when they come into the country, they've got to put something in before they get something else.
Let's come back to the sort of party politics post-Rochester, because in your piece, David, you say that the signs are you will do disastrously in the key election results.
That's what Ashcroft's numbers show. I mean,
how bad do you think it's going to be for the Conservatives?
The trouble is it's incredibly fragile, so you don't know what happened. What his numbers show are Liberal votes going to Labour, and UKIP votes principally, but not entirely, coming out of us. So the two things together sort of end up to make a lot of seats unstable. And so it's not, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's a sort of inevitable outcome, but it does mean we've got to pay really close attention to...
Because as things stand, neither of your parties look like getting an overall majority at the election, which would mean a period of weak government at a very dangerous time.
At a terrible time. I mean, it's almost like the 30s. You've got.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got the possibility. I mean, the prospect of a no overall control parliament is horrifying when you've got the possibility of another major economic and possibly banking crash again. You've got Putin to be dealt with on the east of Europe. You've got the Middle East, which we've got wrong several times so far. An indecisive government, possibly in hock to the SNP or the DUP. I mean, we'll have a coalition if that happens, but it will be a very weak and almost blackmailable coalition.
You don't see a Tory majority at the moment?
Oh, I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, I cannot predict the outcome of this election. First time in my history, in my life in politics, I cannot predict the outcome of the election.
I agree with David. I can't predict the outcome of the election, and I agree with him. It's the first time in my history as well that I can't. But the mainstream parties have got to change the way we do politics.
Yeah.
We have just got to stop the yaboo in Parliament. We've got to stop setting the agenda there. We've just got to start really listening and allowing that agenda to bottom up. But let me just say one thing about coalition politics. It's quite interesting, David, from my experience now as a backbencher and chairing the committee you chaired, is that actually if we get less tribal politics, you might get better quality decision making in terms of the laws we pass and the policies we do.
I want to jump in with one final story because we are nearly out of time here, which is Scotland on Sunday is saying that Scotland is set for full control of income tax. Margaret, if Scottish MPs in Holyrood, MSPs, get full control of taxation up there, then it's very hard for Scottish Labour MPs to have control of taxation down in England, which means that Labour can't govern.
Let me firstly say, I'm not sure I agree with the story. We had the Prime Minister up giving evidence to backbench MPs this week, and my view is that this is not the route down in which they're going. I hear it. But if there is greater devolution, there is obviously an issue about what that means for the UK Parliament. I would say two things. First of all, that we want UK maxing, we want England max devo, London. There's all the property taxes devolved to London. We've now got this, the Manchester authorities there, and they ought to be getting much more devolution. And the second thing is, think we have to rethink about how Parliament works. And again, I come back to my argument. I'm not hostile, actually, to thinking through how you'd get English MPs voting on English issues, because I think what it would force is better consensus, and if we get better consensus across the political parties, we may get more lasting policies.
Let me start on the honesty thing. Both Cameron and Brown made promises at the end of the referendum. If we walk away from them, will we be surprised if we give the SNP an even bigger boost, which is what happens? In terms of the outcome for the UK Parliament, of course it needs to have English votes for English MPs, and that will, if we have no overall control, that'll change the whole dynamic of that too, because you might have a Tory majority in England.
All right, one very final quick question to Margaret. You're being mentioned again as a possible candidate for London Mayor, yes or no?
I'm not going to say now. I think what I'm really delighted about is that at my stage in life, I've got a whole range of options. I'm not giving up on politics, but I've got to think really carefully through how I can make my best contribution over the coming days.
There are still openings for young women.
Thank you.
Well, on that happy note, thank you both very much.